Happy New Year, and this is the final part of our first story for 2026. After the story of Santino, the fight for Manila starts. One year later, the air in the Port Authority stronghold didn't smell of the sea anymore. It smelled of ozone from the dissonance emitter, stale sweat, recycled water, and the ever-present oily tang of the VA, a scent that seeped from the contested lands beyond the concertina wire and fortified walls. Captain Maya Ibarra stood on the roof of Warehouse 12, her eyes scanning the haunted skyline of Manila. Not with a survivor's dread, but with a general's cold assessment. Her stronghold, Kudering Dagat, Fortress of the Sea, was a testament to Santino's legacy. The central emitter, a larger, meaner version of Sybil's, built around the neural cluster of a Reaper Alpha, hummed at the compound's heart. Its field of quiet stretched over 6 city blocks, a jagged bubble of sanity in the foreman's screaming madhouse. Within it, her people, the rats, were no longer hiding. They were manufacturing. From scavenged ship parts, they built reinforced vehicles. From Aegis schematics and Sybil's notes, they crafted specialized ammunition. High-frequency sonic pulses to disorient auditory hunters, thermite charges for the armored variants. They trained not just in marksmanship, but in VA behavioral taxonomy, using the Sybil Codex as their Bible. Santino's quiet forest had given them the blueprint. Now they were forging the sword. A young scout, her face smudged with soot, saluted. "Report from the Northern Watch, Captain. The sergeant's forces have pushed another 2 kilometers into the foreman's eastern industrial district. Engagement is heavy. The foreman is responding with new forms. Scout describes them as crawlers with too many joints and spitters that fire a hardening resin, not acid. It's pulling resources from our sector." Ibarra allowed herself a thin, grim smile. The stalemate held. The 2 titans were locked in a perpetual, grinding war, each adaptation met with a counter-adaptation. It was the perfect distraction. While they wrestled over the corpse of the old world, she would cut out its still-beating heart. Her target wasn't just survival. It was Nexus Prime, the foreman's seat of power, the source of its rapid, terrifying evolution. Santino's theory was their gospel now. Take the tissue of a monarch, and you could build an emitter powerful enough to silence not a neighborhood, but an entire district. Maybe a city. "Gather the lieutenants," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of command. "It's time for Operation Lantern." The briefing room was a converted shipping container, maps plastered on the walls. Not just local maps. A world map, dotted with red pins. Reports, scavenged from the fragments of the global internet that still flickered to life sometimes, told a horrific story. America, the Midwest, was a patchwork of dead zones ruled by colonels and governors, hyper-aggressive pack-hunting monarchs. The coasts were fortified hellscapes, the U.S. military a ghost conducting brutal, failed containment campaigns. China, silent. The last satellite images showed the Great Wall shimmering with some kind of bioluminescent growth. Communications ceased after a broadcast of something massive moving through the Yangtze. India, a kaleidoscope of nightmares. The sheer population density had birthed monarchs of staggering variety and competing ideologies, turning the subcontinent into a charnel house of clashing biologies. The seas were not safe. Whaling ships turned into nomadic hive ships. Submarines gone silent. The thing that took the USS Gerald Ford was rumored to be a Leviathan-class VA that could generate electromagnetic pulses. "We are not alone in this fight," Ibarra told her hardened officers. "But we are alone in this room. The world is burning, and the fire is learning. We cannot wait for a cavalry that is fighting its own fires. The foreman is our fire, and we have the means to snuff out its brain." Operation Lantern was not an assault. It was a surgical strike, a heist. Using the chaos of the northeastern front as cover, a small, elite team would infiltrate Nexus Prime via the forgotten flood control tunnels that ran beneath the old city. Their goal, to harvest a viable neural sample from the foreman itself. The risks were cosmic. The foreman was no longer the brute force construction foreman of a year ago. It was a bioartisan. Its domain was a living workshop of fused flesh, chitin, and reclaimed steel. Its variants were specialized tools. Weaver cast nets of fibrous tendon, screamers disoriented with psychic frequency shrieks, and its personal guard were rumored to be amalgamations of its earliest, most loyal infected, fused into semi-sentient horrors. "Why now?" asked Lieutenant Cruz, her demolitions expert. Why not let the sergeant wear it down further? Because the sergeant is learning too, Ibarra replied, pulling up an intercepted signal analysis. Its towers are not just for detection anymore. They're starting to broadcast a simplified, overriding command signal. It's attempting to hack the foreman's lesser variants, to turn them. If it succeeds, it won't just beat the foreman. It will absorb its innovation. We'll have a single, hyper-intelligent, militarily disciplined monarch on our doorstep. Our quiet zone will be a puzzle it will dedicate itself to solving. She let the implication hang. The time for passive defense was over. The only way to secure their future was to shape the war themselves. To cut the head off the creative monster before the disciplined monster could eat it and become something unstoppable. The team was selected, crews for demolition and traps. Rico, a former urban explorer who knew Manila's underbelly better than anyone. And Ibarra herself, the leader who carried the weight of Santino's hope and the cold fury of a year spent watching her city become a grotesque work of biological art. The night before the infiltration, Ibarra opened a secure channel to Sybil. Santino's face appeared, older, calmer, with a peace in his eyes she envied. Elsa waved from behind him. "You're going," Santino stated, seeing it in her face. "It's time," Ibarra replied. "The silence in your head, it's different now, isn't it?" he asked softly. She nodded. The constant pressure of the foreman's signal at the edge of their quiet zone was a drumbeat she'd learned to translate. "It's planning something. Not just attacking the sergeant. A big leap. I can feel the focus, like it's gathering itself for a masterpiece." "Then you're right to go," he said. "Don't try to kill it. Just take its signature. It's genius. Let its own ambition be the distraction. We'll bring back the key, Santino," she promised. "Not just for us. For everyone listening." "Good hunting, Captain," he said. "And remember, it's not a monster. It's a system. Find the central processor." The line went dead. Ibarra looked out at the darkened port, at the faint, sickly glow emanating from the downtown skyline where Nexus Prime festered. She was no longer just a rat surviving in the walls. She was the scalpel, aiming for the brain of the beast that had made the world its body. Volume 1 was the story of a father's love building a wall. Volume 2 would be the story of a soldier's wrath stealing the kingdom's crown. Volume 2, Chapter 1, The Undercity. The entrance to the Undercity was a mouth that had forgotten how to close. A storm drain grate near the polluted estuary, its bars bent outward by some tremendous, forgotten pressure. The water that flowed from it was warm, slick with an iridescent sheen, and smelled of rotting seaweed and something sharply alkaline. It was the foreman's runoff. Captain Ibarra checked the seal on her rebreather for the third time. Her team, Lieutenant Cruz with her compact breaching kit and sensor sweeper, and Rico with his modified diving suit and a wrist-mounted sonar array, looked like ghosts in the pre-dawn gloom. They carried no heavy weapons. Noise was the enemy. Light was the enemy. Their tools were cutters, syringes, biocontainers, and the stolen, silent tech of Aegis. "Remember," Ibarra's voice was a distorted whisper through the comms bead. "We are not in its territory. We are in its circulatory system. Move like a platelet. Silent, purposeful, and if we're spotted, we clod and vanish." Rico gave a thumbs up, his eyes wide behind his visor. He was young, a street rat who'd mapped every pipe and tunnel for fun before the world ended. Now his hobby was their only map. Cruz just nodded, her face a mask of focused calm. She'd calculated the charges needed to collapse 3 key junctions behind them, sealing their retreat, or their tomb. They slipped into the warm, clinging water. The tunnel was a cathedral of decay. The beam from Ibarra's headlamp cut through the murk, illuminating things that made her grip her dagger tighter. The walls weren't just concrete anymore. They were lined with a pulsating, fibrous membrane, like the interior of a gigantic artery. Thin, root-like tendrils dangled from the ceiling, swaying gently in the current. Some ended in bulbous, gelatinous sacs that glowed with a faint, foxfire bioluminescence. "It's feeding," Cruz whispered, her scanner chirping softly. "The membrane, it's absorbing chemicals from the water. Heavy metals, organic waste. Filtering it. This is part of its resource processing." They moved, single file, against the gentle current. The silence was absolute, broken only by the muffled thump of their own hearts and the distant, seismic tremor of the surface war, a constant, dull reminder of the distraction they relied on. After 20 minutes, Rico held up a closed fist. He pointed his sonar upward. The display showed a vast, hollow space above them. A maintenance shaft. The first checkpoint. They surfaced in a chamber that had once been a pump station. It was transformed. The machinery was encased in a cocoon of the same fibrous growth, now hardened into a chitinous shell. Bridges of living tissue spanned the gaps between walkways. And in the center of the room, growing from a submerged control panel like a terrible flower, was a sentinel pod. It was a bulbous, translucent sac the size of a man, anchored by thick cords to the floor and ceiling. Inside, suspended in amber fluid, floated the twisted form of a humanoid infected. Its eyes were gone, replaced by massive, complex antennae that twitched and scanned the empty air. Wires of fused nerve tissue ran from its spine into the walls. It was a living security camera, a node in the foreman's neural network. Ibarra froze. The Sybil Codex had a name for these, ocularis. Blind, but hypersensitive to vibration, electrical current, and pheromonal disruption. Their quiet zone emitter's effect was attenuated down here, diluted by water and layers of concrete. This thing might sense them. Cruz slowly unspooled a coil of fine wire from her pack. At its end was a small, powerful magnet. With infinite care, she let it sink until it attached to a metal pipe near the base of the pod. Then she tapped a button on her wrist. A low, resonant hum emanated from the magnet, a frequency designed to mimic the natural vibration of the pumping water flow. The ocularis's antennae stilled, orienting toward the sound. It was listening to the decoy. Ibarra signaled. They slipped past, their movements perfectly synchronized, exiting the chamber into a narrower pipe. Behind them, Cruz left a small, adhesive charge on the doorframe. A closing punctuation mark. Deeper they went. The environment grew more alien. The current changed direction, now pulling them inward toward the heart. The fleshy lining grew thicker, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic contraction. A peristaltic pump, Ibarra realized with a chill. The Undercity wasn't just infused. It was digesting the city, drawing resources toward the core. They encountered new variants, forms never seen on the surface. Pale crawlers with atrophied limbs and sucker mouths, clinging to the ceiling, filtering nutrients from the water. A school of swift, eel-like things with needle teeth darted past, ignoring them completely, scavengers for microscopic waste. This was a balanced, specialized ecosystem. The foreman wasn't just a tyrant, it was an ecosystem engineer. Rico's sonar pinged again. He pointed ahead, then made a sharp upward gesture. Target shaft. Nexus Prime access. The shaft was blocked. Not by rubble, but by a living valve, a sphincter of interlocking, bony plates sheathed in tough muscle, currently clenched shut. This was a regulated artery. It would only open for the correct biological signature, or under specific commands from the core. We can't cut it, Cruz breathed. The shock would bring every ocularis in the sector down on us. And it looks armored. Ibarra's mind raced. The codex. The Aegis data. Find the central processor. This wasn't just a door. It was a synapse. She looked around. The walls here were dense with neural wiring, all converging on a bulbous ganglion near the valve, a local control node. We don't knock on the door, Ibarra whispered. We trick the doorman. She pointed to the ganglion. Cruz understood immediately. From her kit, she produced 2 long, needle-like probes connected to her tablet. With surgical precision, she inserted them into the ganglion, avoiding the major pulsing vessels. Her screen lit up with chaotic, shimmering patterns, the raw, fractal data stream of the foreman's local network. It's beautiful, Cruz muttered, a scientist's awe cutting through her fear. It's a hybrid digital biological code. Patterned but chaotic. Adaptive. Can you write a key? Ibarra asked. I can play a note it's expecting. Cruz's fingers flew. She isolated a repeating signal bundle, the chemical and electrical all clear, from a nutrient transport. She replicated it, amplified it, and injected it back into the node. For a terrifying second, nothing. Then, with a wet, grinding shudder, the bony plates of the valve began to retract, sliding over one another. The way was open. A warm, nutrient-rich current, smelling of hot metal and cloying sweetness, washed over them. They swam through, into the pressurized dark beyond. The shaft opened into a space that stole the breath from Ibarra's lungs. They were in a ventricular chamber. Above them, the roots of Nexus Prime plunged down, massive fused columns of what had once been mall escalators, food court signage, and structural steel, now transformed into a single, gaudy-esque pillar of biological architecture. Veins as thick as trees pulsed along its sides. The chamber itself was a lake of the same amniotic fluid, lit by the pervasive foxfire glow. And anchored to the central pillar, 20 meters above them, was what they had come for. The foreman's core interface. It wasn't a brain in a jar. It was a nexus. A grotesque, beautiful fusion. The upper torso and distended, multi-limbed form of the original foreman was still visible, embedded like a fossil in the pillar. But from its back and skull erupted a sprawling, crystalline structure of neural tissue and mineral deposits, glittering with internal light. Wires of living nerve and stolen fiber-optic cable snaked from it into the walls, the ceiling, the depths below. It was plugged into the city. It was the city, and it was aware of them. As they tread water, stunned, the fluid around them began to stir. Not with currents, but with purpose. From ports in the chamber walls, sleek, muscular forms slipped into the lake. They were hunters, but unlike any surface variant. Hydrodynamic, with bioluminescent lures on their heads and limbs that ended in scythe-like bone blades. The foreman's immune response. Its white blood cells. The heist was over. They had found the heart. Now they had to steal a piece of it while it was still beating. Volume 2, Chapter 2, The Heart of the Maze. The hunters didn't charge. They fanned out, moving with a liquid, terrifying grace that made the water seem like air. Their bioluminescent lures pulsed in a disorienting, asynchronous rhythm, casting jagged shadows that turned the ventricular chamber into a strobing funhouse of horrors. Ibarra's mind, trained by a year of studying the Sybil Codex, raced through classifications. These weren't chasers or prowlers. They were something new. Depth stalkers. Evolved for high-pressure, close-quarter aquatic predation. Their strategy would be encirclement, constriction, and dismemberment. "Rico! The current!" Ibarra barked, her voice tight in the comms. "Can you give us a whirlpool? Something to break their formation." Rico, his eyes wide behind his visor, but his hands steady, nodded. He detached a bulky device from his thigh, a modified submersible propeller from a salvage job. "Backup thrusters from a yacht tender," he said, his voice a tense whisper. "Marlowe helped me soup it up. It's noisy as hell." "Now's the time for noise," Ibarra said, drawing her weapon. Not a gun, but a compact, Aegis-designed sonic lance. It emitted a focused cone of debilitating sound. Rico activated the thruster and, with a powerful heave, sent it spinning like a depth charge toward the chamber's center. The water erupted into a violent, churning vortex. The sudden turbulence rocked the stalkers, their elegant formation shattered into thrashing confusion. The chamber roared with the mechanical scream of the thruster. "Go Cruz! Now!" Ibarra yelled. Lieutenant Cruz didn't hesitate. She fired a grapple from her wrist-mounted launcher. The hook, tipped with a hardened ceramic spike, bit into the fleshy, crystalline matrix of the core interface pillar, 20 meters above. She activated the motorized winch and was yanked upward, soaring out of the water and into the humid, charged air of the chamber's upper reaches. Ibarra turned her attention back to the water. The stalkers were already adapting. Two of them broke off, ignoring the turbulent center, and arrowed toward her and Rico with frightening speed. Ibarra raised her sonic lance and fired. A visible pulse of distorted water shot forth. The lead stalker convulsed as the sound waves scrambled its specialized nervous system. It veered away, crashing into a wall. The second one dodged, learning. Rico drew a weapon of his own, a spear gun, but its payload was a canister that exploded into a cloud of viscous, synthetic pheromones mimicking VA distress signals. The cloud confused the remaining stalkers, causing them to snap at the water around them and each other. But the victory was momentary. The chamber itself was reacting. The fleshy walls contracted violently, trying to expel the foreign objects. The thruster, the pheromone cloud, them. The nutrient-rich fluid grew hotter, becoming acidic. Warning lights flashed on Ibarra's suit HUD. The pH was dropping. High above, Cruz reached the core interface. Up close, it was even more overwhelming. The crystalline neural structure hummed with power. She could see pulses of light, thoughts, commands, raw data, traveling along the embedded fiber-optic strands like lightning along nerves. The original foreman's face, half submerged in the growth, was frozen in a silent scream of perpetual transformation. She anchored her harness to the pillar and pulled out the extraction tool, a diamond-tipped coring drill connected to a vacuum biocontainer. She had one shot. She had to take a sample from a neural junction dense enough to hold the foreman's unique signature, but not so critical that its removal would trigger an immediate catastrophic system failure that would trap them here forever. Her scanner highlighted a minor convergence node, a glittering nexus the size of her fist. She positioned the drill. As the diamond bit touched the crystalline flesh, the world screamed. Not a sound. A psychic wave. It slammed into Cruz's mind, bypassing her ears. Visions, alien and terrifying, flooded her. A towering, impossible city of pulsating flesh and shimmering glass. The cold, satisfying click of a perfectly designed trap. The searing pain of a million tiny adaptations, a billion microscopic failures leading to one glorious success. A deep, lonely cosmic hunger to make everything, part of the beautiful, efficient, evolving whole. It was the foreman's dream. Its ambition. Its consciousness. Cruz gritted her teeth, blood trickling from her nose inside her mask. "You're just a lonely architect," she snarled through the psychic storm and activated the drill. The physical scream that followed was deafening. The entire pillar shuddered. The amniotic fluid below boiled. The stalkers in the water went into a frenzy. The core sample, a glowing, geometric shard of neural crystal, slid into the biocontainer with a click. Cruz sealed it, the psychic pressure cutting off abruptly, leaving a ringing void in her head. Volume 2, Chapter 3, The Architect's Wrath. The core shard's power was terrifying. At just 15% output, the upgraded dissonance emitter projected a silent zone that stretched over a full kilometer from Kuta Ing Dagat. Within that bubble, the foreman's will vanished. Its infected became animals. The port rats had not just a shield, they had sovereignty. But a shield is not a sword. And the foreman, denied direct control, began to wage war at the edges of physics and biology. Its first stroke was artillery. It happened at high noon. A sentry on the west wall reported a whistling sound. Not from the sky, but from the ground, 2 kilometers away. From the flesh-fused ruins of a glue factory, a biological catapult, a massive sinew-and-bone trebuchet, uncoiled. It launched not rocks, but living ammunition, bloaters. Corpulent, gas-filled infected, bioengineered to be volatile. They arced through the silent zone, where their coordination failed, but their ballistic trajectory didn't. They landed within the walls. The first impact was a wet, crushing thud. The second exploded on impact, showering the area in bioacidic fluid and shrapnel of hardened bone. The third released a cloud of choking, neurotoxic spores. The rats scrambled. They had prepared for frontal assaults, not indirect fire. The silent zone could stop a coordinated charge, but it couldn't stop a cannonball. "The fuck is that?" Rico yelled over the comms, watching through binoculars as the fleshy trebuchet recocked itself with a sound like tearing leather. "A new variant," Ibarra said, her voice cold. "Not a soldier. A weapon system. It doesn't need to be coordinated inside the zone. It just needs to fire from outside it." The foreman was thinking around the problem. It couldn't command inside the silence, so it was building dumb fire platforms on its borders. The second stroke was sapping. That night, vibrations were felt through the foundations. The burrowers were back, but not trying to collapse trenches. Sensors showed they were digging tunnels underneath the silent zone's perimeter, aiming to emerge inside the walls, bypassing the field entirely. They were met with Marlowe's counter-invention, thumper charges. Heavy weights dropped into the tunnels, triggering shaped charges that collapsed the boreholes in a cascade of rock and pulped biomatter. It was a brutal, underground war of attrition. The third stroke was psychological, but indirect. The psycho-sirens didn't whisper into their minds. They set up beyond the perimeter and broadcast a maddening, subliminal frequency into the ground. It carried through the bedrock, vibrating the very structures of the fortress, inducing nausea, paranoia, and sleeplessness. It was a siege engine that targeted morale. The rats were holding, but they were reacting. Ibarra knew that was a path to defeat. The foreman had infinite creative bandwidth. They did not. "We cannot just sit behind our quiet wall and take his inventions," she declared in the War Council. The air smelled of ozone, spent cordite, and the faint, sweet rot of the bloaters. "We have to take the fight to him. We have to move the silence." Kaito, his eyes red from sleeplessness but blazing with ideas, projected a schematic. "The mobile emitter. We've been working on it since we got the shard. The theory is sound. We mount a secondary, smaller DS emitter, powered by a bank of capacitors, not the main generator, on the back of the armored truck. It'll have a fraction of the range, maybe 200 meters, and a limited duration. But it can move." He called it Project Lackad, walk. Marlowe unveiled the vehicle. It was a Frankenstein's monster of survival. A 10-wheeler cargo truck, its cab and engine encased in scavenged APC armor. The flatbed was a fortress of welded steel plating, topped with the spherical housing of the mobile emitter, looking like a brutalist radio telescope. Wires snaked to a trailer packed with shuddering capacitors and fuel for the deafeningly loud auxiliary generator. "It's not pretty," Marlowe grunted. But the armor will shrug off small arms and claws. The problem is the emitter. It's a lighthouse. The second you turn it on, every infected looking at it will know exactly where the silence is coming from. That's the point, Ibarra said, a plan crystallizing. We don't use it to hide. We use it as a battering ram. We drive a spear of silence right into his territory. We carve a path. Not for an army. For a demolition team. She pointed to the map, to the glue factory housing the biological trebuchet. We take out his artillery. We show him his creations can die. We fight evolution with engineering. The next morning, under a pallid gray sky, Operation Lack had launched. The armored truck, callsign Hinayupak, quiet bastard, rumbled out of the gates, flanked by 2 jeepney PCS armed with .50 calories and spear launchers. Ibarra rode in the command cupola of the lead jeepney. The moment they left the main silent zone, the world came screaming back. The psychic pressure of the foreman's attention was like a physical wind. Infected heads turned in unison towards the rumbling vehicles. Emitter on, Ibarra ordered. Kaito, inside the truck's armored brain, threw the switch. A visible wave of distortion pulsed from the spherical housing. A bubble of silence, 200 meters in radius, bloomed around the convoy. Infected pouring from the ruins to intercept them suddenly stumbled, their coordinated pincer movement dissolving. The lead jeepney's .50 cal hammered them into paste. They were a moving island of chaos in the ordered sea of the foreman's will. It was working. As they neared the glue factory, the biological trebuchet swiveled towards them, its living ropes tensing. A bloater was loaded. Driver evasive. All guns target that arm. Ibarra yelled. The Hinayupak swerved. The .50 calories and spears tore into the trebuchet's muscular throwing arm. It shuddered but fired. The bloater sailed over their heads, exploding harmlessly behind them. Again. Cripple it. A second volley severed a major tendon. The arm went limp, the weapon neutralized. But the foreman had been watching. Learning. From the factory's upper floors, new shapes emerged. Not catapults. Spitters. But these didn't fire acid. They fired globs of a sticky, hardening resin. The first glob hit the lead jeepney's windshield, instantly crystallizing into an opaque, rock-hard shell, blinding the driver. New variant. Anti-vehicle. Ibarra shouted. Target the spitters. Emitter holding. Capacitors at 60%. Kaito reported, his voice strained. We have maybe 5 minutes before we need to recharge. Make it count. Push to the factory wall. Rico's team, you're up. The convoy buelled its way to the factory's base. As the mobile silent zone disabled the spitters on the lower floors, Rico and his demo team scrambled out. They slapped magnetized breaching charges onto the structural supports of the weapons tower. Charges set. Fall back. The convoy peeled away, the emitter sputtering as the capacitors drained. As they retreated, the charges detonated. With a groan of tearing flesh and crumbling concrete, the foreman's first grand artillery piece collapsed in on itself. Back within the safety of Kudering Daggit's main silent zone, the rats cheered, a raw, defiant sound. They had drawn first blood. They had destroyed a masterpiece. On a monitor, Ibarra watched the distant factory ruins. There was no roar of rage. There was only a terrible, focused stillness. Then movement. Not of attack, but of repair. Smaller, insectal variants were already swarming the wreckage, clearing, measuring, hauling biomass. The foreman wasn't angry. It was inspired. It had just received priceless data on mobile silent zones and human tactics. Its next creation would account for them. Ibarra looked at the returning, battered convoy, at the exhausted but triumphant faces. They had won a battle. But in doing so, they had handed the architect a new set of blueprints. The war was no longer between a fortress and a genius. It was between two competing kinds of engineering, one of flesh and relentless adaptation, the other of steel, electricity, and desperate human cunning. And somewhere to the north, the Sergeant detection towers would have logged the entire engagement, the silent bubble moving, the explosion, the retreat. It would be updating its own cold calculations, its legions shifting minutely, waiting for the moment when both the creative mind and the clever pests had exhausted each other's latest inventions. The real war was just beginning. Volume 2, Chapter 4, The Battle of the Drawing Boards. The victory at the glue factory was a fever dream, burned away by the cold light of a new reality. The foreman's creative engine, stoked by the data of their assault, was now operating at a terrifying pace. The war had entered a phase Ibarra dubbed the Drawing Board War. a blistering cycle of invention and counter-invention, fought in the ruined laboratories of the old world and the fleshy workshops of the new. The seeker spores arrived on the next easterly wind. Microscopic, airborne VA seeds that settled on every surface. They were inert until they detected the specific electromagnetic signature of the mobile emitter's capacitors charging. Then they'd ignite, emitting a pheromone scream that drew every infected in a 5-block radius. The rat's next Lacad run was ambushed by a tsunami of blind but directed rage before they'd even left the gates. Countermeasure: the static Washington Kaido and Marlowe-rigged high-voltage electrostatic dischargers around the vehicle bay. Every exit and return, the convoy rolled through a crackling curtain of electricity, burning the spores off their hulls. The foreman responded with shriekers. Bulbous, stationary pods that emitted a wall of deafening white noise, masking the subtle hum of the mobile emitter and disorienting the human crews. Sound became a weapon. Countermeasure: the silent dome. They modified the emitter to project its field in a tighter, forward-facing arc, and paired it with directional speakers on the jeepneys that broadcast inverse sound waves, creating pockets of dead air around the convoy. They fought noise with engineered silence. But the architect's masterstroke was the Titan. It began deep in the financial district, in the cavernous ruins of a bank vault-turned womb. Thermal drones showed a massive, pulsating heat signature. It wasn't being commanded into existence, it was being grown. A being of such colossal size and simple biological imperative, walk forward, crush, that even the complete severance of the foreman's signal might not stop its momentum. It was a battering ram made of meat, designed to test the structural limits of their walls, their silence, and their will. "It's not just a weapon," Dr. ANJ said, analyzing the blurry drone footage. "It's a statement. He's telling us our silence has a ceiling. That we can break his coordination, but we cannot break physics." Ibarra saw the deeper, more terrifying clock ticking. Every day they spent countering the foreman's art was a day the sergeant inched forward. Its detection towers now formed a near-continuous line along the northern front. Its legions, ever disciplined, had begun salvaging operations, not just fighting the foreman's frontline variants, but systematically dismantling and carrying off the most interesting biological wrecks for study. The sergeant was curating the foreman's failed experiments, learning its rival's creative language. "If the sergeant gets to the foreman's core first," Ibarra told her inner circle, the map of Manila glowing between them, "it won't just kill it. It will download it. It will integrate that boundless creativity into its own perfect discipline. We'll face a monarch that doesn't just send a titan. It sends a titan that understands combined arms, flanking maneuvers, and logistical supply lines. That combination is extinction." The mission crystallized, desperate and twofold. Sabotage the Titan's gestation vat before it could be born. Harvest a new core shard from the foreman's central network, not just to power their own defenses, but to have the ultimate bargaining chip, or weapon, for what came next. But they couldn't do it alone. Kudang Dagat was a fortress, not an army. They needed more hands, more minds, more territory under the quiet. "We broadcast," Ibarra declared. "Not on the foreman's frequencies. On the old dead ones. Emergency bands. Ham radio channels. We use the mobile emitter not just as a weapon, but as a beacon. We broadcast the Sybil codex, the emitter schematics, everything. We offer the one thing every surviving pocket in Luzon is desperate for, a blueprint for silence. We call them here, to Manila, to fight not just for loot, but for the future of the species." It was a gamble of monumental risk. It would draw attention from every remnant, every bandit lord, every desperate soul. It would also paint the biggest target in the world on their walls. The broadcast went out, encrypted with a simple cipher based on the Philippine flag. It was a data packet of hope and cold truth. "We can make the monsters dumb. We have a foothold. Help us secure the source, and we can build a quiet archipelago in this screaming world. The Republic may be silent, but its people don't have to be." The response was not immediate. But 3 days later, a contact. A faint, carefully worded signal from the Rizal Mountains. A group of survivors, led by a former geologist, had held out in the cave systems. They had minerals, explosives, and a desperate need for medicine. A week after that, a garbled message from a Batangas fishing commune that had turned their boats into floating fortresses, fighting off aquatic variants. They had fuel and maritime expertise. They were not an army. They were a coalition of the cornered, and they were willing to listen. While Rico and Cruz began planning the dual sabotage/heist mission on the Titan VAT and Nexus Prime, Ibarra prepared for the first diplomatic summit of the apocalypse. She ordered the main emitter's zone to be expanded to its absolute limit, a visible demonstration of their power, creating a safe corridor to the port. The first envoy from the mountains arrived on a modified dirt bike, his face wary. He was shown not just the walls, but the workshops, the gardens, the school. He saw the silent zone in action, a prowler wandering aimlessly past a guard post, ignored. He was given a simple transceiver. "Tune it to this frequency when you're overrun," Kaito said. "It's a localized kill switch code. It'll trigger a mobile emitter unit we can airdrop. It'll give you 10 minutes of silence to regroup. A down payment on trust." The envoy left with the schematics for a simple, fixed emitter and a promise. "Send us your best fighters and engineers. Help us kill the brain of this thing, and we will give you the power to build a silent home." The foreman, sensing the shift in the electrical and radio noise around its territory, responded. The seeker spores mutated, now attracted to radio transmissions. The shrieker's frequencies became more variable. The Titan's growth rate increased, its form visible now, a hulking, six-limbed behemoth of fused bone and muscle, slowly taking shape in the shadows of skyscrapers. And to the north, the sergeant's towers began emitting a new, aggressive scampulse. Not searching anymore. Targeting. It was mapping the foreman's core defenses with the precision of a bombardment grid. The logical monarch was preparing its final, calculated move. Ibarra stood on the wall between the two fronts, a creative monster accelerating its masterpiece to crush her, and a logical monster preparing to consume the winner. Her coalition was fragile, her weapons were mere prototypes, and her best plan was a near-suicidal heist. But for the first time, they were not just defending. They were building. Not just a fortress, but an idea. The battle was no longer just for survival. It was to prevent the birth of a god, and to reclaim the corpse of a nation before it was repurposed into the engine of an unbeatable new world. Volume 2, Chapter 5, The Coalition of the Cornered. The broadcast was a siren call in the silent sea of despair, and the desperate answered. They came not as an army, but as a ragged tide of last stands and final hopes. From the winding roads of the Zambales Mountains rumbled a convoy of survivors from the overrun Air Force Base in Florida Blanca. They brought not soldiers, but ground crew, mechanics, and a single battered MD-520MG helicopter, its tail scuffed and one skid broken, but its rotor still willing to turn. Its pilot, a haggard captain named Alvarez, saluted Ibarra with a grim smile. "We have fuel for 3 sorties. Maybe 4. Tell us where to bring the noise." From the coast, sailing under a tattered Philippine flag, came the BRP Locken, a surviving Jose Rizal-class frigate, its superstructure scarred by acid and its deck cleared for helicopter operations. It had been fighting a lonely war against the coastal horrors, its missiles spent, its crew exhausted. They offered naval gunfire support from its remaining 76mm cannon and a safe haven offshore. "The sea is becoming its stomach," its captain, Della Costa, reported. "We hold the line, but we need a future on land." Nomadic groups arrived in militarized dump trucks and fuel tankers welded with armor plate. A surviving light armored cavalry troop rolled in with 2 surviving Simba armored vehicles, their 25mm cannons a sudden, profound addition to the port's arsenal. They were the remnants of a unit that had been conducting a fighting retreat for a year, their command gone, their purpose now fused with Ibarra's. Kuta and Daggett transformed overnight from a fortress into a staging ground for a counteroffensive. The air buzzed with new energy, new arguments, and a fragile, brittle unity. They were no longer just the port rats. They were the silent republic. But as they trained, integrated, and planned the great heist, their scouts reported a terrifying shift. The foreman was changing priorities. The artistic monarch, feeling the tectonic pressure of the logical sergeant from the north and the coalescing human threat from the port, made a ruthless calculus. The weaver's web around Nexus Prime began to dissolve, its psychoactive tendrils retracting, their biomatter being reabsorbed. The seeker spore towers were dismantled. The shriekers fell silent and were carted away by worker variants. Every resource, every scrap of creative energy, was being funneled into a single colossal project. The Titan, its growth rate became explosive. Drones showed it pulling itself free from its gestation vat, a skyscraper of pulsating flesh and knotted bone. It stood over 30 meters tall, a crude, terrible parody of a copper, its 6 limbs ending in wrecking ball fists and foundational claws. It was not elegant. It was final. A biological WMD. The web, the spores, the shriekers, they were experiments. Dr. A&J analyzed, her face ashen. He's cannibalizing his own portfolio. This is his last, greatest masterpiece. He's not trying to outthink us anymore. He's going to smash the board. Worse, the foreman's front line against the sergeant began a controlled collapse. It pulled back its most specialized, intelligent variants, leaving behind hordes of basic chasers as cannon fodder to slow the northern advance. It was sacrificing territory and lesser creations to buy time for the Titan to be fully birthed. Its strategy was now horrifyingly clear. Let the sergeant's disciplined legions grind through the sacrificial horde, then crush both the weary northern army and the human port with one unstoppable blow. The heist was impossible. Nexus Prime would be a fortress within a fortress, guarded by the foreman's last, most loyal elite. The only target that mattered now was the Titan itself. If it reached the port, even their silent zone would only turn it into a mindless, momentum-driven avalanche of meat and bone. It would bury them. Ibarra stood before the Coalition Council, a tense gathering of soldiers, sailors, mechanics, and guerrillas. The map showed the Titan's location, the sergeant's advancing line, and their own fragile position. "We cannot steal its crown," she said, her voice cutting through the fear. "We must break its hammer. The Titan is his final argument. We must provide the counter-argument." The plan was a desperate symphony of coordinated violence, a test of the silent republic's fragile unity. Phase 1, the Anvil, the Sergeant. Using the last of their diplomatic bandwidth, they broadcast a simple, unencrypted data burst north, coordinates and a time. It was a gift and a provocation. They were telling the Sergeant, "The heart of your enemy is exposed here, at this time. Strike, or forever be the second smartest thing on this island." They would use the logical monarch's own ruthless efficiency as their anvil. Phase 2, the Hammer, the Republic. The Coalition would launch a full, combined arms assault on the Titan's position as it began its march. The frigate Locken would provide long-range fire. The Simbus and armored trucks would form a mobile firing line. The helicopter would do gun-run reconnaissance. And Project Lackad, now with 3 mobile emitters, would create shifting zones of silence to disrupt any supporting variants and, hopefully, confuse the Titan's primal directives. Phase 3, the Scalpel, the Kill Team. A volunteer team, led by Cruz and Rico, would infiltrate during the battle. Their target, not the Titan's head, but its structural heart, the massive fused cluster of VA neural ganglia that acted as its central nervous system. They would plant high-yield thermal charges, designed not to explode outward, but to burn inward at thousands of degrees, turning its core to ash. It was a gamble that risked everything. If they failed, the Titan would wipe them out, and the Sergeant would sweep in to claim a crippled, nearly defenseless city. The Republic would die in its infancy. Dawn on the day of the battle was stained with smoke from the Sergeant's advancing artillery. The foreman's sacrificial hordes were being systematically obliterated. The Titan, sensing the vibration of war, took its first earth-shaking step towards the port. The battle for Manila had begun. The Locken's 76mm gun spoke first, shells screaming overhead to burst against the Titan's chest. Chunks of flesh and bone flew, but it barely slowed. The Simbus opened up with their chain guns, stitching lines of fire across its limbs. The mobile emitters whined to life, and bubbles of silence bloomed around the advancing armored vehicles, causing packs of supporting Reapers to stumble and fall, easy prey for the gunners. Captain Alvarez's helicopter buzzed like an angry hornet, raking the Titan's back with door-mounted machine guns, searching for weak points. The Titan swung a fist the size of a jeepney. It missed a Simba but hit the ground, sending a shockwave that overturned a technical. It was slow but unstoppable. Each step brought it closer. In the chaos, Cruz's team moved like ghosts through the ruins, using the Titan's own colossal shadow for cover. They reached its massive leg, a pillar of corded muscle, and began their climb, magnetic grapples biting into the flesh. Epilogue, the Fractured Kingdom. The silence that settled over Manila was not peaceful. It was the silence of a drawn blade, held steady between 3 throats. To the south, in the ruins of the port and its newly claimed districts, the silent Republic licked its wounds and counted its prizes. The battlefield around the fallen Titan was a grisly harvest. Salvage teams, moving like surgeons within mobile bubbles of silence, extracted crystalline neural shards from the carcasses of elite variants and the Titan's own monstrous heart. Each shard, pulsing with captured genius, was a seed for a new quiet zone. The first was installed aboard the BRP Locken, transforming the weathered frigate into a silent, floating fortress, a sovereign territory that could sail the toxic coasts. Another was airlifted to the mountain holdouts in Resal, fulfilling Ibarra's promise. But the greatest prize, Nexus Prime, remained untouched. A dark, silent knot in the city's center. Scouts reported the foreman had not fled. It had retrenched. The artistic monarch, humbled and wounded, had cannibalized its remaining outer defenses to seal the Star Mall complex. It was no longer broadcasting grand designs or chaotic hunger. It had gone dormant, a genius locked in its gallery, surrounded by its last, most perfect creations. It was a vault, and inside that vault lay the ultimate source code of its creativity, the primordial shard that could power a silent zone large enough to shield a city, or a weapon sharp enough to crack a continent. To the north, the sergeant's legions did not advance. The logical monarch had seen the Titan fall, had observed the human coalition's coordinated strike. It had achieved its primary objective, breaking the foreman's offensive capacity and securing vast new territory. Now it began a chillingly methodical process. Its forces built not just fortifications but infrastructure. Flesh towers morphed into processing nodes. The biomass of the fallen foreman elites and the Titan itself was systematically gathered, not just for consumption but for analysis. The sergeant was reverse engineering its rival's artistry, studying the patterns of creativity to make its own discipline infinitely adaptable. It was patient. The prize in the city center was not worth a costly frontal assault against a prepared human enemy and a cornered defensive artist. It would wait and learn and become stronger. Manila was now a fractured kingdom. The sergeant held the industrialized north, a realm of chilling order. The silent republic held the port and the corridors carved by the mobile emitters, a patchwork of quiet zones slowly expanding. And between them, in a shrinking, hyper-fortified core, the foreman brooded. Captain Ibarra stood on the bridge of the Locken, looking at the holographic map. It no longer showed survival. It showed strategy. "He's not just hiding," she said to her council, now including Captain Della Costa, Captain Alvarez, and the leaders of the mountain and fisherfolk factions. "He's fermenting. Whatever comes out of that vault will be his absolute masterpiece. And he," she pointed to the icon of the sergeant's territory, "is getting smarter by the hour. He's not fighting because he's running every simulation, and every simulation says to let us and the foreman exhaust each other." "Then we deny him the simulation," said Marlowe, his hands black with engine grease. "We don't attack the vault. We contain it. We ring Nexus Prime with a permanent emitter fence. We turn his gallery into a prison. We take the time he's giving us to build." The plan that emerged was not one of conquest, but of nation-building. The Silent Republic would use its harvested shards not for more weapons, but for more homes. They would establish a connected network of silent zones, a quiet archipelago stretching from the port to the mountains to allied coastal settlements. They would fortify the front line facing the sergeant with layers of emitters and physical walls, creating a demilitarized zone of pure, deafening silence that no coordinated army could cross. And they would prepare for the eventual, inevitable clash. Kaido's team worked on the next generation of technology, resonance lances that could potentially shatter a monarch's control node from a distance. The coalition trained not just as militias, but as a unified defense force. Weeks turned into a month of tense, watchful peace. The Republic breathed, healed, and grew stronger. Children in the port flew kites made from parachute silk, their laughter echoing in the silent air. Fresh water was piped from purified sources. Forges and workshops hummed. But on the wall facing north, the sentries watched the sergeant's territory. There were no attacks, only the slow, relentless growth of alien logical structures. And deep in the sealed heart of the city, sensors detected a low, building energy signature, a creative pressure cooker reaching its limits. Ibarra knew the truth. They had bought a season, not a future. The fall of the Titan was not the end of the war. It was the end of the first war. The next war would not be against mindless hunger or brilliant, chaotic artistry. It would be against a perfected system, a cold, evolving intelligence that had studied both its enemies and was slowly synthesizing their strengths. The Silent Republic had been born from a father's love and a soldier's defiance. Its next trial would be to survive the gaze of a god who had learned to calculate both. Volume 2, Final Epilogue, The Quiet Republic. The truth, as it filtered in from re-established ham radio nets and the reports of the BRP Lachin's long-range patrols, was both a relief and a chilling affirmation. The foreman and the sergeant were anomalies. Their scale was a product of a perfect, horrific storm. The economic heart of the nation, a population in the tens of millions, and the initial taint delivered via its very arteries of commerce. Elsewhere, the VA virus had birthed monarchs, but none of such terrifying magnitude. In Davao, a monarch styling itself the Sultan had carved a bloody kingdom, but fierce local resistance from militarized clans and the mountainous terrain had contained its biomass. When Republic scouts arrived with a mobile emitter and the battle-tested tactics from Manila, its coordinated defenses fell apart. A single, precise airstrike from the Zambales helicopter, guided by a silent zone on the ground, collapsed its neural tower. The Sultan was dead in a week. In the Visayan seas, the Lachin encountered monarchs of the deep, Leviathan-class variants fused to coral atolls, directing schools of predatory swimmers. But on the open water, with no urban maze to hide in, they were just big, intelligent targets. The Lachin's silent zone rendered their coordinated ambushes useless, and its 76mm gun turned them into sinking reefs. The frigate earned its grim title, Leviathan Hunter. The pattern repeated. A monarch in Pampanga's agricultural plains, a sprawling, hive queen vulnerable to fire. A psychic priest-king in Baguio, isolated by the mountains and starved of new hosts. Each was a deadly regional terror, but none possessed the world-altering potential of the minds that had fought over Manila. The Silent Republic strategy, find the core, disrupt the signal, destroy the node, was a replicable blueprint for liberation. And word spread. It began as a trickle. A fishing banca from Mindoro, its hull scratched by deep-sea claws, following rumors of a safe port. A convoy of buses from Bulacan, packed with hollow-eyed families who'd lived under the shadow of a lesser monarch for a year. Then a flood. Engineers from the geothermal plants in Albay. Doctors from stranded hospitals in Laguna. Teachers, farmers, street vendors, all carrying the same desperate hope and the same stories of isolated, containable horrors. Manila, the once graveyard, became the beacon. Its shattered skyline was no longer a monument to the end, but to the fight after. The safe zones, powered by harvested shards, grew from military enclaves into thriving districts. The sound of construction, hammers on steel, the cough of generators, the laughter of children in newly cleared parks, drowned out the distant moans from the contained wild zones. Captain Maya Ibarra found her war shifting from tactics to logistics. Her desk was buried in maps not of assault routes, but of aqueduct repairs, grid schematics, and census reports. A reluctant general had become a de facto governor. The title president was whispered in the markets, but she dismissed it. She was just the one who answered the radio. One evening, she stood on the rebuilt landing of the Port Authority building, looking at her city. Glimmers of light dotted the darkness, not fires, but electric lights, powered by restored grids and guarded by silent emitters. The dark, silent mass of Nexus Prime was still there on the horizon, a reminder. To the north, the sergeant's territory was a faint, menacing glow of bioluminescence and orderly, alien industry. Santino's voice came over her secure line from Sybil, his tone calm, the static of the world almost gone from it. They're calling it the Republic Spring on the radio nets from Cebu. It's not a spring, Ibarra replied, watching a patrol of the new, unified civil guard move down a well-lit street. It's a graft. We're grafting something new onto the old, rotten trunk. It might hold. It might not. The trunk is still alive, Santino said. And the sergeant is a patient gardener. He's watching us graft. Let him watch, Ibarra said, a flicker of her old steel returning. He knows order. He knows efficiency. But he doesn't understand community. He doesn't understand why a mechanic from Davao will work through the night to fix a generator for a fisherman from Pangasinan he just met. That's our weapon. That's our silence he can't jam. She signed off. The work was endless. The threats, the brooding artist, the patient general, the thousand smaller horrors still lurking in the islands were real. But for the first night in a long, long time, the lights below outnumbered the stars above. The heart of the nation, once stilled by a poisoned drink, was beating again. It was a faint, arrhythmic beat, surrounded by silence and watched by monsters. But it was beating. The quiet republic stands. Happy New Year, and this is the final part of our first story for 2026. The story ends, but hopefully you all enjoy this story.